Well, hey all, Lance again with Rigging Lab Academy. Good friend Tom Wood with VRS, Vertical Rescue Solutions. We're here part two. For those of you who haven't seen part one, we went into a lot of the stuff that brought Tom into into the rigging industry, where things are at, where the company and the organization is with PMI and VRS. But excuse me. Cut. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about something that's brand new on the shelf. We're going to talk about Tom's new book. I'm going to let him talk a little bit about it, Trading Steel for Stone. So, Tom, thanks for being here.
Yeah, Lance, thanks for having me, and thanks to RLA as well for having me. So,
shameless plug.
Shameless plug for my book. That's what this is all about.
So, we've got a fair bit of questions from people who have asked us questions about Tom, his life, his book. This has come either through website, through questions, through Tom's social media posts, just questions that he gets during training, what have you. So without further ado, let's just read some of these off for you.
Okay.
First question: What character traits do you think are most essential to a long career in any rescue discipline?
That's a good one. I think there's a lot of character traits you have to have. But
first, I'm sorry. Tell us about the book.
There you go.
Sorry about that.
We're just jumping the gun all over the place here. Yeah, the name of the book is Trading Steel for Stone, Tales of a Rust Belt Refugee Turned Rocky Mountain Rescuer. So that's a mouthful to say, but it kind of sums up what the book is about. It's not a book of war story collections for mountain rescue. It's nothing like that at all. In fact, it might be the opposite. I basically want to make sure that people understand that folks that do search and rescue are folks.
Mm-hmm.
They're bus drivers, they're teachers, they're liquor store cashiers, they're roofers, they're ex-vets, they're cowboy poets, they're all of these things. And rescue is not the number one thing in their life. Their lives are the number one things in their lives because they're what I call non-paid professionals. And so they volunteer their time, but I would just to call them volunteers would kind of imply that they're on the same line of work as like people who volunteer their time at the soup kitchen or things like that, which are great things to be doing, but the level of commitment that it takes to do search and rescue, especially in the high altitude of the western in the mountains in the U.S., it's a whole nother level. So what I'm trying to do is convey the humility of the folks that do this, and also to kind of get rid of the source of one of my biggest pet peeves, and that's folks who look down on people who need rescued, as if they didn't deserve to be rescued, or if they were rescued, then we should just charge the hell out of them for their stupidity. Because as you'll see in the book, I probably wasn't the king of stupid, but I could have been the duke pretty well. So it's hard for me to look down on the folks that need rescued, given some of the really silly or just outright stupid things that I did when I was younger. So that's kind of what the book is about, and so far it's done really well. Really grateful to Big Earth Publishing for picking it up. I finished this book almost 6 years ago now, and it was a 5-year process to find a publisher. So it's just a very competitive field in publishing right now. So.
Yeah. Well, I know it's going to do well, and I know that I resonated highly, although my experience isn't as vast as yours during the years of stupidness. But I too got into.
I should coin it the years of stupidness.
I got into rescue with our county team, as I told you, for the same reason. Unprepared, stupid ideas, ignorance got me on something that they had to pull my rear off of, and that gave me almost 10 years of working with the county technical team here. So so I know that one. So
and I can actually answer your first question now.
Yeah.
Now that I've remembered it again, character traits
Character
for a
traits.
long career in doing this silliness. Humility, number one. I think you have to be willing to admit when you make mistakes and that you do make mistakes, and that's okay, and that's part of the way that we learn. And especially me, if you pick up this book, you'll see that I give lots of examples of learning from my mistakes. And then I think the second trait, and some people get this trait confused with something else similar, and that would be confidence. You have to have confidence to do this for any length of time, and I think a lot of folks confuse confidence with ego. And they are different words, but I think that a lot of folks looking from the outside in, or newer folks coming in to talk to veterans, they see what these people do, what they say, how they carry themselves, and they interpret that as maybe someone having quite an ego. But I would say, for the folks that have been around for a while, you should have confidence in what you do, and you have to blend that with some humility if you want to, keep this going. And it certainly doesn't hurt, thirdly, to have a good sense of humor about things, most especially yourself.
As you said, that sense of humor, I drew back to some of the times when we came back with some of our rescues that they were body recoveries, and yet the transportation back to the trailhead, to the posse, was anything but what you were ready for, and a sense of humor was needed. So, all right, second question. How many rescues have you been part of in your 18 years as a mountain rescuer?
So, for better or worse, on our rescue team, we have folks that are very anal about keeping track of things, which isn't always the case in search and rescue teams. We're kind of a hodgepodge. Sometimes we do what we have to, and then we got to get back to our lives. But we have some folks that are great at keeping stats. That would be Woody. Everybody knows Woody.
Yeah.
Thanks to Woody, I know he could probably give me the exact number better than I know it myself, but somewhere around 400 to 450 calls, I guess, in
Wow.
18 years, somewhere in there.
Well, I can go off on a number of questions on that one. Wow, 400. I might save a couple of my questions to the end here. How do you balance your work and family life with your recreational pursuits and your passion for mountain rescue? One of the things that we were talking about off camera here, which actually should have been part of all of this, which was good, is our both, we both agreed that you can't have passion without sacrifice. And the greater the passion, the greater the sacrifice. And I'm not sure how many people actually recognize that in what you guys do. So, how would you answer this question?
Oh boy.
The balance aspect.
In terms of the balance and sacrifice, unless you're a single person that you live in a van and don't have a pet, or don't have a mother or a father or a brother, you rely on the support of your family, first and foremost. And if you don't have the support of your family, then you need the support of your peers. And if you're going to be doing this for any length of time, and I would say that, I would consider you a veteran if you'd spent more than 5 years of doing search and rescue, because some teams are a lot busier than others. But if you're going to do this for any length of time, you have to have folks that support you. And I would even extend that to mean your work family, your employer. For probably the first 15 years that I was in search and rescue, I helped teach the classes coming in every year for our new members. And the very first thing that we would say is you have to have the support of your family, and you have to have the support of your employer. And we won't even talk to you until you've had a conversation with them first. Even before we even think of selecting you, if you can't get accepted, and then have that conversation with them, because those were the folks that spent about a year on, and then they were gone. So you have to have the support of folks in your life, and that's something that's just I can't stress enough. So if you're out there thinking of getting into search and rescue or rescue in general, have some good, realistic, serious conversations with the folks you love, because you can't do it by yourself. You just can't.
And for those who haven't listened to the first half of this conversation here, part one, you did go into that somewhat in depth about your relationship with work, and as well as a lot of your other staff, family, so to speak, extended family through that, and all the things that you have to go through to make that work. So you know firsthand what that is.
Yes, absolutely.
So number 4, you sort of touched base on this already, but I think we can have some fun with this one. Why do you dislike the term, I would even say disdain the term, volunteer mountain rescuer?
Yeah, I kind of hit on it just a little bit, but I know a lot of folks say this is just semantics, this is just wordplay. It doesn't, mean much, but one of the things that I hate about when folks talk about mountain rescuers or search and rescue in general, there's 3 words that are used together, and it's not always a good thing. Just a volunteer. What I don't like is when I hear folks in search and rescue use that as an excuse. I don't have time to do all this training because I am just a volunteer and I have a life outside of this. We didn't do much training in that area because we don't do it very often, and we are just volunteers, and so they use that as an excuse to justify non-professional behavior or bad habits. We're just volunteers. How can you ask that of us? We are just volunteers. But yet when someone outside of that fold refers to them as being just volunteers, they take offense to that. They say, no, we're professionals, we just don't get paid. And that's the stance I like to take, is that we're non-paid professionals. So for folks that do search and rescue, and I would say even mountain rescue in particular, because the environment tends to be substantially more harsh sometimes than say certain parts of the country where you have woodlands and that's a concern or whatever, but you throw mountains into the mix and altitude and avalanches and the objective hazards there, it kind of steps the game up. And I would also include cave rescue with that as well, because their environment is every bit as harsh, if not more so, than the mountain rescue environment. And I've had experience with both, and it's a tough environment. So I really feel pretty strongly that if you want to raise the bar, you want to elevate the seriousness of what you do and relay that to the public, and this goes to fundraising too. I think folks would love to help out organizations that are not for profit when they see that they're professionally run by professional folks, and who take themselves seriously and don't use that just a volunteer excuse when it's convenient.
That's interesting. When I first read the question, I wasn't sure which direction it was going to go, whether it was the way people approach volunteer rescuers or the person who is the volunteer rescuer. And I will admit that when I first got onto the team, I was incredibly stoked about what I was doing, and I was the cheerleader for everything. And there got to be a certain point where the 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock call outs are just, I don't want to do this.
AM.
And AM. Exactly. And
not the PM ones. Those are okay.
No. Yeah. And but I found myself having to have some conversations with some people about me and my attitudes and my perception of what this is. So as I hear you talk about that, I'm just kind of going back in time thinking I was that guy, and it took a few people to straighten me out.
Hmm.
You know, and here I am doing this, you know, I'm selling this stuff for a living, talking about training, and I'm dealing with the thing. So anyways, and off camera, you and I have talked a little bit about this one. How do you cope with body recoveries?
Yeah, and that's a tough one, and that's something that's different for everyone. Long ago, I gave up on the notion that you can give someone a speech and that will help them prepare for their first body recovery or their 100th. You know, you can say, here's some tools. Let us know if you need some help. And for us, when I became a member of the Alpine Rescue Team back in 1998 or 97, that's what we were told. If you can't hack it, then don't do it. You know, suck it up, buttercup was the phrase that was used quite often. And that was in relation to body recoveries most often. And what I saw happening was that we were losing members of our search and rescue team. Very few of them specifically called out that they quit because they were tired of dealing with death, or dismemberment, or any of the horrible things sometimes we deal with. But years later, when I would talk to them, they would tell me that they were still troubled by the image of that drowned kid, or that avalanche victim who had the scarf wrapped around her neck and it had snapped her neck, and she was 17 years old and she was out for a snowshoe on REI rented snowshoes on an area that 100 people had walked by and been fine that day, and to this day they still struggle with that. And so for me, the way that I cope with body recoveries is I just understand the fact that at some point they get to you, and there are natural reactions to coping with these things, and if your reactions tend to be out of proportion over a certain length of time, and what that time is, nobody knows. Basically, if it becomes a disorder, if it's affecting your life, your wife, your family, your job, your mental well-being, you should seek some help. And in the past, we used to just tell people, well, call someone if you need some help. Here's some numbers. And it was not very effective, obviously. Very few people will admit when they need help. So I've worked very hard over the last several years on our rescue team. I've been our field director now for the last 4 years. It's been the busiest 4 years in our almost 60-year history. And one of my missions was to rectify the way that we were handling post-traumatic stress disorders within our team, and especially as they relate to body recovery. So we don't expect our members to call for help anymore. We call them. We have meetings after a fatality that are only inclusive of the folks that were there handling the recovery. We make sure that they're frank discussions, and those are the first discussions that we have after the one-on-one with our mission coordinators. So we'll call the folks and ask them, are you doing okay? And we don't ask just once, because everyone the first time will say, I'm fine. Yeah, it was a tough one. I got it. We wait and we call again. And usually the second time, folks are like, yeah, you know, I'm just kind of surprised. It really does bother me more than I thought. And at that point, sometimes just having that conversation fixes it right then and there, and people are good. Other times, we have a conversation, we realize, you know, this has gone into an area that I have no training to cope with. So now, I'm going to have someone call you. I'm not going to ask you to call someone else again. So we've made it more of, we're pushing resources to them instead of expecting them to just call out on their own. And so that's how we cope with the aftermath. But while it's going on, and it's unfortunate for the folks that don't know this, but it's the gallows humor, the inappropriate remarks sometimes, that's what we cope with. And that is definitely something that I talk a lot about in this book, because typically when these kind of remarks go on, we keep them in-house. We don't share them with the public. We don't let, even sometimes law enforcement hear some of our conversations or inappropriate comments. But you have to still frame that within the context that you have to accept that the person that you're joking with, who's on the team with you, may take great offense to what you're saying, and that's a risk. But you have to have a little bit of a sense of humor to deal with the horrific situations that we're sometimes faced with. And so for me, that has been one of the things that have helped me. And then that combined with the support of my teammates, because sometimes even the support of our family members or spouses, it's just not the same as getting the support from the people who are right there with you, covered in the blood or whatever, or seeing the things that you've seen that were right there with you. Those are the folks that can support you and help you the best. So that's, for me, has been my big takeaway, because I've come across a lot of folks on our team who basically are stuck with these horrible images and memories for the rest of their lives, but now they're not a part of the rescue team anymore. They have no support group or peers to understand why they still feel this way 15, 20, 30 years later. And so for me, my goal has always been, first and foremost, when it comes to recoveries, to take care of the psychological first aid for our members the same as we would as if they were injured by tripping over a log on a call. We take care of their physical first aid without batting an eye, but when it comes to psychological first aid, people get all weirded out and feel that they're not qualified, so they do nothing, which is the worst thing you can do. So,
well, and earlier you were talking about what I have is kind of a triangle kind of a thing: humility, confidence, and ego. And they're not always equally weighted in a healthy person.
No.
And when you mentioned specifically humility, and sometimes we forget that humility is that one equalizer that allows those wounds to become opened to people who can actually come in and help. You know, the biggest hindrance is mostly us. Just it isn't the fact, like you said. Often it's conversations, just people just knowing that people care and love you, and they'll walk you through it, or walk with you.
So tell me why this bothered you. Tell me why this hurts your feelings. How did that make you? Don't read off of a checklist to make sure someone's okay. You have a conversation with them, and the conversation could be, "Hey, dude, what's up?" And that says a lot. So that's important. You got to broach that subject, and the longer you're in search and rescue and you become a leader or a manager of folks, it's your responsibility to own up to that part of search and rescue, because that's just as much a part as the fun rigging problems, as the litter evacs, as the medical, the search techniques. That stuff is just as important, because that will buy you a longer career in search and rescue if that's your passion. Because if you don't take care of that part of it, you'll hit a wall, you'll become frustrated, and you'll walk away, and it won't be a positive ending that you would like. So I've seen it dozens of times. So I feel pretty strongly about trying to prevent that from happening in the future for folks.
That brings back a lot of memories, just personally with me. So next question. Why did you decide to write a book about your experiences as a mountain rescuer?
I actually started off writing about search and rescue just in general. We have, 4 14,000-foot peaks in our response area. We cover 3 different counties. Our search area, our coverage area is a little bit bigger than the size of poor little Rhode Island. It keeps getting picked on for size comparisons. So we're a busy team, and so I had lots of experiences to draw from. And so I started to try objectively to record some of the bigger things that I was a part of. And I'm a tiny, tiny little piece of a giant pie for that rescue organization, and then mountain rescue as a whole, millions of stories. But I started to record this, and I tried to write it like a journalist, because that's my training. I was trained as a journalist. And I just kept realizing, wait a minute, I keep writing about myself involved in these. I couldn't pull myself out of any of these stories. I just couldn't. And I tried for years to do that. And then all of a sudden I just came to the realization that, screw it. I'm just going to put myself in these stories because I was there. And everyone says your first novel is always autobiographical anyway, whether you mean it to be or not. So I just said, well, screw it. That's what I'm going to do. And so I just took to recording a few things that I remembered very vividly and tied them into things in my past, in my life, because my goal in writing a book about search and rescue was to write a book about search and rescue that people who knew nothing about search and rescue would care about. So I didn't want to glorify any of the things that we've done, and in fact I wanted to knock things down, get rid of that hero label that keeps getting thrown on mountain rescuers, because I think sometimes mountain rescuers do heroic things, but I don't think of them as heroes, and I think most of us that do this, we get kind of creeped out when we hear people call us heroes, because that's not us. That's like,
you mean they're not all like Sly Stallone?
yeah, we're not Bruce Willis, we're not Sly Stallone, we're not Arnold Schwarzenegger, but basically I wanted to write a book that would make the average person give a rat's ass about search and rescue, because there's lots of books out there about climbing and expeditions and peaks, and there's a few out there about search and rescue, and some of them are pretty good, but there's a lot of them that are just like, it was a dark and stormy night, there I was, and there's some of that in here. There's a little bit, you have to have that, but I wanted to chart a more personal course through this, and I wanted just the average regular person to kind of get why we do what we do and what that looks, tastes, and smells like, because I think that's something that was a little bit lacking in some of the nonfiction about search and rescue out there, that it's okay to admit when you screwed the pooch. It's okay to admit that you laughed when you probably should have been crying. It's okay to admit that you made a complete fool of yourself once in front of somebody. It's okay to admit that something destroyed you personally, or that your marriage failed as a result of your passion for search and rescue, or personal vices, or any. That's all in here, and that's all things that I feel that make us human beings. And I think if you want to be a really good rescuer, you got to be a really good human being first. You can't just be a rescuer and be in a vacuum. You got to be a human being, and because if you don't care about the people that you're out there looking for, you won't have a very long career doing this stuff.
So in some respects, like you said, it's introspective and it's all about you in a sense, but without, like what you just said, the passion that you work through in terms of the sacrifice. But as long as it has to be pointed at somebody else and their benefit and their life. Otherwise, like you said, it's a short career. Some of these questions, it looks like are you've already touched on a lot of them, but maybe we can get in a little deeper on some of them. You share some pretty personal things about yourself in this book. Was that hard?
It wasn't hard to write, but it was hard to see it published. I got some really good advice from somebody who wrote memoirs for a living, and they said, when you sit down to write like your parents are dead. Write like you can say what is important to you without fear of offending someone. And so I took that to heart, very literally, and that's what I did. And I don't exist, like I said earlier, in a vacuum. There's people in my life, and I can't write about certain situations in my life without writing about certain people who were in my life. Whether it's a situation like my brother maybe attempting suicide, or my wife having a really hard time with some postpartum depression issues. Those are things that you're not supposed to talk about. And given the conservative Midwestern upbringing that I had, it really went against my nature to want to open up about things like that. But what I started to realize is that if I couldn't, be out there warts and all, nobody's going to take me seriously with what I'm trying to say in this book, and that's that you got to be a human being, and human beings have faults. And so I'm a big proponent of, cutting yourself to the quick first, because somebody else will do it eventually, especially when you write a memoir. If somebody's finding something out about you that you didn't know and you wrote about, you failed as a writer. And so my goal was to lay it all out there, warts and all, and hopefully people respect the spirit that I've done that in, and that they get that it's okay to do things that are maybe not so nice even sometimes, or to do things that some people might even find offensive. You know, some of my favorite writers, that's how they lived. You know, Henry Miller, Kurt Vonnegut, these are, you know, satirists, people who poke fun at life. Mark Twain, you know, they poke fun at life so that you understand how fragile it is, how important it is, and to never take it so seriously that you suck the joy out of it. So that's kind of what I wrote about the hard stuff.
I was listening to a podcast yesterday with a particular person, and one of the things that he always makes a point of doing is when you expose yourself to somebody else's view, worldview, or whatever, you put yourself in a very vulnerable position. And when you don't do that, you basically secure the fact that you are always handicapped somewhere emotionally.
Yes. It's a blind spot you're covering, and you don't always see it, but everyone else
and
does.
Everybody, like, you are the pink elephant or the purple elephant in the room. And so he makes sure that he, you know, routinely makes sure that he puts himself in a place of cutting himself in a place where he, you know, he didn't get into how he did it, you know, but knowing this person, and how you know, popular his enterprise is, you know, it's working well. So, but yeah. So was Trading Steel for Stone your first book?
It's the first one that I've authored completely on my own. I contributed an essay into an anthology last year called, oddly enough, Car Bombs to Cookie Tables, the Youngstown Anthology, basically. A lot of fantastic essays by Belt Publishing collected about growing up in Youngstown and where the city's at now. And if you're not familiar with Youngstown, Ohio, it's basically the center of what used to be called the Rust Belt, that included cities like Flint and Detroit, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, you know, all the great industrial cities of the 20th century, which are now just not where they used to be, and rusted. But oddly enough, you know, there's a lot of folks that take pride in that designation these days, which I think is great. And then I've contributed chapters in several rescue books, primarily high-angle rope rescue techniques from Tom Vines and Steve Hudson, the 4th edition. I also helped Louie McCurley work on her fall protection book that came out a few years ago, and then her recently released book, first of its kind, on industrial rope access. I wrote 2 or 3 chapters for that as well, which is a great book, first of its kind, and they're textbooks, so super helpful in that environment. And then also I've contributed different articles for, like, the Mountain Rescue Association's newsletter, The Meridian, 5280, a really well-known publication based out of Denver, Colorado Serenity, a local regional lifestyles magazine in Colorado. So, you know, my degree in journalism from Kent State kind of didn't get completely thrown in the trash when I picked up a rescue career.
There you go.
So my professors would be happy with me, I suppose.
If you didn't have enough already, you're adding to the plate. That's amazing. I know when we were talking about earlier about publications and books and what it takes, just kind of going back to that continuity issue, and there were some other things that we talked about in terms of, you know, what makes a great company great. And you know, having been in this, you know, this industry for pretty close to 2 decades, 20 years, I've been able to watch you guys and others grow, and other people come and go and stagnate, or just, you know, rip through the growth spurts. And the like I said, the one of the joys that I've been able to have is to watch the continuity of PMI and now VRS with you and Louie and the rest of the folks. You know, Robert. You know, Robert has been around for forever, it seems, and just stalwarts. I mean, you're there, you're doing the stuff, and you're able to write about the humanity and all the stuff that goes into it. But now, you know, we talked about, you know, the publications, the textbook type of things that Louie's putting out, as well as yourself, and just or being part of that, and the contributions that you guys make are huge,
Mm-hmm.
and you still work for a living, you know. So it's like, where do you find this time?
Yeah, we scrape it by.
Let's see here. Just a couple more left. Hold on. Biggest influences. So the question was, or is, who do you feel? Who were your biggest influences when you set out to learn about rescue and rigging?
Boy, when I first started, I did this a long time before I came on to PMI. So, my influences were the people who were the leaders on my team, because if you know much about search and rescue, when you come on to an organization, everything that you know about that organization is from basically the folks that have probably been around for a long time, all the dinosaurs, all the old farts. So your influences. So, when I came along, I was lucky enough to have several senior members on our rescue team in different ways influencing me. One was Bill Sullivan, a member who kind of took me under his wing, and I struggled with knots when I first came on.
It's hard to imagine.
For a couple reasons. Number one, my brain doesn't work that way.
Right.
I'm a kinesthetic learner.
Yeah.
I have to do things over and over and over to know them. And, speaking of, being brutally honest about, things that you're not so proud of, before I joined our search and rescue team, I was in the process of a horrible divorce. And in frustration one day, I put my hand through a window, sliced the back of my hand, cut all the tendons across the back of my hand. And it took probably almost 3 years before I could really tie my shoes comfortably, because I actually had to go to the bank and re-sign my name because they wouldn't accept my signature anymore on checks. It was that bad.
Dang.
So when I started my career in search and rescue, tying knots for me was quite literally painful.
Right.
And Bill Sullivan and his wife Chris, who was also in my member class, making one, took me under their wing. There go the dogs.
There they go. Bicycles.
Squirrel. And helped me with that. So Bill Sullivan was one of the first ones, and my good friends Mark Mativi, Paul Woodward, Woody,
Yeah.
Tom Loback on our rescue team. I could just keep going on and on. They'd been around for a long time, been doing it a long time. And two of the people I just mentioned, Tom Loback and Paul Woody, they just, in the last couple months, completed their 1,000th search and rescue mission.
Wow.
So they've been on 1,000 search and rescue calls. So those are the people that I got to learn from. I was very fortunate.
Wow.
As I got involved in the MRA, I had some of the folks on that level, on the national level, start to tutor me and school me on things. And then, of course, when I came along to PMI, I had Louie and Steve Hudson there to kind of shepherd me in certain ways. And they led by examples. So their biggest thing was you have to have some skin in the industries that you're selling gear to or training, and that means if you want the respect of the people that or you're doing business with, you have to do certain things, and that means doing the things that you want people to buy your stuff for. So
it's hard to get authenticity when you don't put the work in.
Yeah. You got to have some skin in the game, and I still feel that. And Steve Hudson said something to me very early on, and I've made it my mantra, and it's just I asked Steve, there's something that didn't make sense to me when I came onto PMI. We spent a lot of time and money sending our employees to ANSI meetings, to OSHA meetings, to ASTM meetings, to Cordage Institute meetings, to NFPA meetings, all of these meetings with zero return financially. I mean, we spend money, we lose money actually doing these things. And so for the longest time, I just couldn't figure out why in the world are we doing this, because I saw a couple other companies doing it, but not many. Why did you do that? And Steve's answer was just, well, because it's just the right thing to do. We work for a life safety company. We should be involved in, some of the rules for the guys that do this stuff. Yeah. He goes, it's just the right thing to do. And so that's why I'm still way overcommitted and doing way more things than I should, because I still feel that you got to contribute on all different kinds of levels and you get back what you put in. If you put in 110%, you're going to get back 110%, probably more. So that's pretty important to me.
Yeah. Yeah. He's left quite a legacy. I know I didn't really get to know Steve all that well, but over the years, from the first time I met him through the, I see him at trade shows or, conferences or whatever, and every time, I just remember this one particular time when I happened to go to OR a couple years back for a number of different reasons, and saw him and we talked, and there was a particular philosophy that I had in terms of business structure, and we kept going round and round, and I didn't get it, and and I would just kind of cock my head and look at him, and like, surely you can't believe what you're telling me here. I mean, nobody does that. And I won't talk about what the conversation was, but his point was because it's the right thing to do, regardless. And like like you and I have joked about in the past, today, what do you do with that? It's a non-arguing point. It's not even worth going, because when you do the right thing for the right reasons, regardless, the responsibilities are internal first. But they're measured by the fruit of who you're working with, which often has nothing to do with money or profits. Which is part of the conversation that we were having. I'm like,
there's more to life than money, and
I've learned a lot.
And I have to laugh because it just reminds me of good old Facebook.
Yeah.
It was a meme somebody had, and I can't remember which politician it was that they had the picture of, but probably one of the two that we all talk about right now.
Right.
But it was basically, it says integrity, doing the right thing when no one's looking.
Yes. Right.
And that's kind of what I look at this as involvement behind the scenes on this stuff is we don't do it to get attention or to help sell more product. We just do it because that's just what you're supposed to do when you work for a company that sells things that people trust their life to.
So we talked about a little bit and about how do you feel about owning up to your own mistakes?
You got to do it.
Just got to do it.
You got to do it, and I don't even know how many dozens or hundreds of mistakes I own up to in there, but there's quite a few. And to me, it's a big part of growing as a human being. But when you work in a business where life and death they're right there, and one little mistake and you're dead or someone else is dead, one little thing that you drop or one thing that you just didn't pick up, you gotta admit when you make mistakes. And that was actually something that was new to me when I came into search and rescue, because I didn't like to own up to anything that I'd ever done wrong, ever. And that was part of the reasons why my first marriage just went to hell. Part of that. Luckily, I've learned from that and gone forward. But on our rescue team, every year, we have an award that we give to folks. We have some great awards, for doing heroic things or civic-minded things or fundraising or any of that stuff. But my favorite award is the one that we give every year to a lucky individual, and it's called the Windy Peak Airplane Magnet Aw Shit Award. And it goes to the person who has, pardon my French, but the biggest fuck up of the year.
Right.
I'm a 2-time award winner myself, and it's funny, and because you have to own up to your mistakes, and to do so, it knocks you down a couple pegs, but it also, brings a little bit of a reverence and some humility into the whole mix, and I think it's healthy. It's healthy, and so, you have to be able to do that in the business that we're in, and if you can't, you're just going to become a grumpy, mean old bastard that eventually just walks away from search and rescue in disgust, because somebody will question a decision that you made at some point, and you won't be able to take it.
There's no believability.
So
someday you're going to make a great movie about yourself. We already talked about number 12 here. Emotionally, this is the last question. Emotionally, what was your most difficult rescue and your most rewarding?
Well, some of them I did talk about in the book in terms of both, actually, I guess. The hardest ones for me have been probably the suicide recoveries that we do.
Right.
For our mountain rescue team in the Front Range of Colorado, our number one category of fatality for several years now has been suicide. That's more than climbers, skiers caught in avalanches, drownings, heart attacks. Number one category of fatality for a number of years for both us and Rocky Mountain Rescue up in Boulder to the north. It's been suicides. And so for me, I've been on so many of them that it just got to the point where you just had to stop and reevaluate why you're doing what you're doing.
Right.
Why I'm not even getting paid for anything.
Right.
Why am I submitting my psyche to all of this trauma over and over and over and over, knowing that someday something's going to get to me and it's going to be tough. But probably the hardest one was a suicide recovery of a very, very wonderful young man named John Thomas Fielder. And he happened to be the son of a very famous Colorado photographer, John Fielder. And unfortunately, JT took his own life on a very windy, snowy peak back in, I believe, 2006. And the only reason why I mention him by name and mention him at all, and I mention the story in the book, is because his father, after this incident happened, he came out and publicly started to address how we look at suicide, how we talk about suicide, how suicide affects all of us, and how common it's become. And so that recovery was very difficult for me. He reminded me a lot of my youngest brother. That was tough. Reminded me of some problems that my family had had. I've never had a suicidal thought ever in my life. Just not part of who I am. I just have been fortunate that way. So even though I've never had those thoughts, I've been around lots of people who have, and they've expressed those desires to end their life to me. And I always responded poorly, usually in anger to those kinds of calls for help. And so after that incident on the mountain, I took it to heart to fix that problem. And so I've spent a lot of time dealing with suicide professional folks who can deal with that to help out others, coping strategies, things like that. So it's become a kind of personal crusade for me. So, as horrible as it was that JT lost his life, he really inspired his father. He certainly inspired me to do something about it, and to not just be one of the people who suffers in silence or allows others to suffer in silence. So I've really made it my personal mission, and I've done presentations at the International Commission on Alpine Rescue on this topic in Europe. It's something that's very near and dear to me, and it's something that we have control over. And it's something that if you don't talk about it, it becomes worse.
Yeah.
And so, again, I responded very poorly to the folks in my life who needed help, and luckily I didn't do irreversible damage to them by my inability to cope with their problems, which are actually not all that unusual problems for any of us. So that was the hardest one for me, probably, and it was one where just myself and my good friend Brian Osborne and a fellow teammate Todd Holmes, we were the three who were charged with pronouncing him as being dead, and by ourselves finding a way to get him off the mountain, because his avalanche danger was extreme, weather was terrible, and if we didn't get him right then and there, he was going to unfortunately be on that mountain for at least another week or two. So pretty high stress environment to come across that when you're not expecting it, and to cope with that. So that was one of the worst ones, but I turned it into something good, I hope, at the end of the day. And probably one of my happiest ones was when everybody lived.
Yeah, right. It's always a good one.
When they live, it's great. And it was especially wonderful because it was a fellow mountain rescuer who became injured in the course of a rescue on a snowmobile with a recovered search subject on the back at 13,000 feet. In a whiteout, they drove the snowmobile off of a cornice 900 feet down the mountain.
They ride it all the way down?
No, they rolled.
Oh,
They went over the cornice and disappeared and rolled 900 feet down to the bottom of the mountain. And it was the second coldest day in recorded Colorado history, I believe. And so it was 2 900-foot uphauls with only about 20 foot of space, using 2 snowmobiles and a T for an anchor, with about 10 to 12 folks.
Yeah.
It took most of the night, and we all got squirrel.
There they go again.
Super cold. Everyone had frost nip. Didn't know if we were even going to survive, let alone both the people, because the one subject had a compound femur fracture, and that was the rescuer.
Oh my gosh.
So we accomplished that, and that was the first time that I've ever been put in charge of a technical evacuation.
Yeah.
So we've been practicing for years and training for years at that point, but I'd never actually done one or been in charge of one, and that was the first time that somebody said, "All right, you're in charge of this, make it happen." And we did, and it was painful, and we weren't sure it was gonna. It's not a foregone conclusion when you're doing these things sometimes. If everyone's going to live. In movies, you kind of have an idea, but in reality, when you're doing it, you don't know if what you're doing is the right thing, and you don't know was that decision going to cost somebody their life because I chose option A instead of option B. So that was a good one. That was a really good one. So.
And when you've done all your training, and like we talked, before, with Piatt and others who always taught, Reed as well.
Yes.
Train higher than the level of your calls. And then when you've done all that, and you're forced with option A or option B, there is no real wrong answer because you've trained, you've used the best that you possibly could. And circumstances might dictate one choice over another. So anything else that you want to add? I mean, we've gone through a lot.
That's a lot of stuff. Yeah. Hopefully folks are still with us. I'm
sure they've saved it, put it on pause, and wait for the drive home.
I will say that you'll get a lot of, contrary to the last couple subjects we just talked about there, the book was written with humor first and foremost in mind. So I think even for folks that have no interest in doing search and rescue or have never done search and rescue, my hope is that they pick this up and say, that was a pretty interesting story. I'm glad I know something about that, because now I can assign a little bit of a face, even if it's Tom's goofy face, to the search and rescuers that are out there doing this stuff every single day and never making a big deal out of it. So.
Yeah, speaking of face, I looked at your mark, your logo for your book. Why don't you show everyone what that is? You've got the.
It's a. You may or may not.
Can you
see that?
Yeah.
It's actually bigger on the back there. So I can
there
thank my fellow mountain rescuer and PMI employee Angie Luck for that design. Ice axes with a steel I-beam above the mountains there. So that's kind of what this is all about. Coming from the Rust Belt, from the Midwest, knowing less than zero about search and rescue, and then having to find a way to do it.
And in the end, they're all ingredients that make up a little bit about who you are, and the rest is the circumstances between it.
That's right.
Well, thanks again for joining us. We appreciate Tom for making his way out here west to see us. I know he's got another job here tomorrow, but as soon as we hang up this, we're going to go have fun out there in the backcountry somewhere. So anyways, thanks for joining us. We'll talk with you soon.
Peace. Thanks, Lance.